his opening remarks.
Thank you, Jacob. So I just want to make 2 points. The first is that geopolitics begins at home. You can't and you won't solve the world's problems if you're not clear who you are, what you stand for, and where you're going. It's very easy to be clear about what you're against, but ultimately it is what you stand for that really matters. The international and the internal are interlinked. And what we see exemplified in the case of Israel is a fusion between an armed conflict in the Middle East with a cultural conflict in the West, driven in its terms by a quite remarkable domestic moral illiteracy. Only nations with a clear sense of their own self-interest and the ability to connect with others on similar terms can hope to solve the problems that confront us today. But our young people here are being invited to reject Western civilization through the ideology of decolonization and other ideologies. And the nation state is not even the key player anymore. The German security analyst Ulrike Franke recently noted how big tech players in Ukraine from the beginning of the conflict have been some of the more significant participants. Microsoft knew that there was going to be an invasion before anybody else because there was a malware attack in Ukraine that they had been asked to resolve. Amazon were called in within a few hours of the conflict starting in order to secure the nation's data, because loss of data in a conflict is one of the biggest challenges. And SpaceX Starlink were called within 2 days in order to provide Zelensky with communications, and Musk replied on Twitter, done, within 2 hours of being asked. These are not military supply companies. They're not Raytheon, who make missiles, Rheinmetall, who supply tanks, or Lockheed Martin aeroplanes. They're, as I said, big tech. So the protagonists are not state-supported or government-influenced, but private enterprises whose loyalties may not align with the country that they're headquartered in, something that Taiwan is acutely aware of because of Musk's connections to China. They have bigger research and development budgets than their host nations. And in addition, we've seen how much of the fighting in Ukraine has been taking place through the use of commercial drones supplied by DJI in Shenzhen, China, which controls 90% of the world's market in that. That brings me to my second point, which is that whilst it's undoubtedly true that as things currently stand, the coming period will see a shift of power to the East I'm talking about is not the one that you might be imagining. China may be one of the most important economic players in the world, but aside from its own internal growing problems, it remains politically relatively marginal. And that's because we mustn't confuse power with authority. China has a vast military, a huge population, the most cities, over 1 million people in the world, some of the biggest foreign investment in the world, although that's declining, the most PhDs in science and technology on Earth. But its responses to the wars in Ukraine and the Middle East have shown it to be naive, opportunistic, and with nothing much more to offer than Western managerialism. It produced a 12-point plan to settle the Ukraine conflict, which any half-baked consultancy group in the West could have written. And its Ministry of Foreign Affairs put out a document entitled US Hegemony and Its Perils that's completely in keeping with the mood of the times in the West. Economic power is not cultural authority, which is what China lacks. Reference to Chinese wisdom or Chinese characteristics fails to inspire anybody. And the other rising powers remain so at the level of economics alone, and for now, China can offer little more than a poor version of the same managerial international relations that everybody else does. Rather, and I'll finish on this point, the East I'm referring to is that true authority will accrue to are, maybe surprisingly to you, Ukraine and Israel. And that's because only those who understand what's at stake in the contemporary period and go about doing something about it can have long-term credibility in the eyes and allegiances of the people, not just there, but worldwide. Ukraine is fighting for its sovereignty, which is the collective form of human agency or subjectivity. What the war in Ukraine has shown is that real security comes from the people, from being able to call on, motivate, and involve society in matters of collective interest. And Israel is fighting for civilization and humanity itself. It's only those who understand what's at stake and are willing to fight for it who can claim authority in the long run. John Stuart Mill, I'm sure you all are familiar with, famously said, "War is an ugly thing, but not the ugliest of things," continuing that the degraded state of moral feeling which thinks nothing is worth a war is much worse. But he also continued, "When people are used as mere instruments for the selfish purposes of a master, such war degrades people. But a war to give victory to their own ideas of right and good, and which is their own war carried on by their free choice, is often the means of their regeneration." I'll finish there.
Praise the Bill.